evening everyone and welcome to Murdoch University. My name is Dr. Catherine Bourdains and I am Project Officer at Harry Butler Institute at Murdoch University, and I am very, very pleased to be your host this evening. I'm here in my capacity as a member of the Keith Roby Memorial Lecture Committee, which is also an honour to be a part of. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this intriguing and timely discussion. I'd like to start, though, by acknowledging some of the many special guests who are with us tonight, starting, of course, with our speaker, Professor Peter Newman, also Keith Roby's wife, Kathy Roby, her son, Mark, and daughter, Karina Roby, donors to the Keith Roby Memorial Lecture Series who are with us tonight and those who couldn't attend. Also my fellow members of the Keith Roby Memorial Committee. Distinguished guests, including colleagues from academia, the public sector and industry. Finally, alumni, our wonderful staff and students who are able to attend with us tonight. It's wonderful to have you all here. Before we commence, I would also like to pay my personal respects and on behalf of the University to the traditional owners of the land, this unceded land on which we are meeting tonight. The land of the Whadjuk Noongar people of the Noongar Nation. Kaya Bula, Nala Karich Whadjuk Noongar Mort, Kaya Karak Nijabuja. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and all Aboriginal people present here today. We at Murdoch University are very proud to continue the long tradition of sharing knowledge on this land. Now, just some housekeeping that we need to do. First of all, in the event of an emergency, you need to exit up the stairs, both sides, and head out, even if it's raining, calmly onto Bush Court. Please listen to instructions from staff if something awful occurs. Hopefully it won't, because we're prepared, you see, bring an umbrella, it never rains. The muster points are located at the pop-up ref and on Bush Court. As a courtesy to all of our guests, I can remind you to please turn off your mobile phone or turn it to silent or aeroplane mode. There's nothing more embarrassing than your phone being the one that goes off in the middle of the talk. So just double check. I'd now like to invite our esteemed Vice-Chancellor, Professor Andrew Deeks, to talk about how we're making the university more sustainable. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks very much and good evening, everyone. I'd also like to acknowledge that Murdoch University operates on the lands of the Whadjuk and Binjarab people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to Noongar elders past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal people who are joining us in the room today. As you've heard, Murdoch University, the grounds on which Murdoch University stands have been a place of teaching and learning for thousands of years. We're very proud to continue that tradition, particularly when we can share that teaching and learning with the broader community as we're doing here tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge all the guests that are with us today, particularly Kathy, Mark and Karina, and the generous supporters of the Keith Roby Memorial Trust. You may be aware that we've recently begun the celebrations for the 50th anniversary of Murdoch University. The 17th of September marked the 50 years since the inauguration of our university. This is a time of celebration for the university, and it's also made us reflect on our founding ethos as a university committed to conservation and to the environment. I thought it'd be relevant to take some time this evening to share with you a little of the history of sustainability at Murdoch University and how this foundational value got its place at Murdoch. Murdoch University was conceived during the 1960s as a time of momentous social, economic and technological transformation, and inaugurated during 1974 in the Third Industrial Revolution. This created the framework for the information and knowledge society that we know today. The era was also marked by profound social change, with the women's rights, peace, First Nations, environmental and gay rights movements all gaining momentum during that period of time. From its conception, Murdoch University enjoyed this difference, promising a fresh outlook free from traditional methods and traditional attitudes. Murdoch University opened with 6 foundation schools: veterinary studies, education, environmental and life sciences, mathematical and physical sciences, human communication, and social inquiry. The role of the Foundation Professor of Environmental Science was taken up by Desmond O'Connor. Professor O'Connor had a diverse background of work, including having worked in the Pentagon as an engineer. A cornerstone of Murdoch University's difference was the requirement that all first-year students took a cross-disciplinary foundation course outside their field of study. This broadening approach underscored Murdoch University's ethos, founded on the core values of equity and social justice, sustainability, global responsibility, innovation, entrepreneurship, and scholarly integrity. It was also in 1974 that Keith Roby became the foundation lecturer in chemistry at Murdoch University. His approach to science and his vision of community science, or science as transformed and applied to the community's real and human needs, was ahead of his time. He was active in promoting Murdoch University's interdisciplinary education and also early environmental awareness. Dr. Roby believed science could make a major contribution towards resolving contemporary issues, such as the dilemmas surrounding the environment, energy, resources, and genetic engineering. This pioneering approach to science that he championed in Murdoch's early years has become a mainstay, not only at Murdoch, but now the world over. Professor Peter Newman, who we'll hear from this evening, was the first lecturer in environmental science and was employed by Foundation Professor O'Connor for what could arguably be called the world's first degree in sustainable development. It was called, at that time, Population and World Resources degree, but was renamed in 1989 when the word sustainable development came to be known. Professor Newman spent more than 30 years at Murdoch University and was instrumental in establishing Murdoch's early sustainability research programs through his role as the inaugural director for the Institute of Sustainability and Technology Policy, the ISTP. I certainly am looking forward to hearing from Professor Newman this evening as he shares those memories of his time at Murdoch. We began celebrating our 50th anniversary in September by recognising the contributions of our staff, the impact made by our researchers and alumni, and the wider community change brought about by Murdoch across 50 years. Both Dr. Roby, who we remember tonight, and our guest speaker, Professor Peter Newman, were among those early influential leaders at Murdoch who were essential in the establishment of and the cementing of the foundational values of Murdoch University. Now, in 2024, sustainability is one of the 3 strategic themes in our strategic plan, Nagala Kwat Bidi, Building a Brighter Future, which will guide the university through to 2030. The strategy commits the university to reaching sustainability goals such as becoming carbon neutral and reaching zero waste to landfill by 2030, as well as creating a truly sustainable campus. Under the Harry Butler Institute, our collaborative research is also driving innovation for a sustainable future. Leading experts in terrestrial and aquatic ecology, biosecurity and One Health, resource and waste management are working with industry, government, community and academic partners to address current and future environmental challenges. With 50 years of history behind us, we now look forward, focused on how our actions in the future will continue to create change in the sustainability space. The work of our early pioneers of sustainability will go on at Murdoch University. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Deeks. I'd now have the honour of inviting Emeritus Professor Mike Calver to give us a brief history on Dr. Keith Roby and how the Keith Roby Memorial Lecture Series came into being.
Thank you very much, Kath. The Keith Roby Memorial Lecture Series is named in honour of the late Dr. Keith Roby, a Foundation staff member at Murdoch University. It's an annual event addressing science, social justice and sustainability. Keith Roby arrived at Murdoch University in late 1974, shortly before it first opened to undergraduates in February 1975. Approximately 50 years ago, if you've been paying attention to previous speakers. He came because he was attracted to Murdoch's foundational educational objectives, which included commitments to addressing contemporary issues, excellence in undergraduate teaching, interdisciplinary studies, and engaging with the community beyond the campus, as we are doing in the lecture this evening. Keith epitomised academic leadership through his commitment to using his scientific skills for the good of the community in what he called community science. Some of his major contributions to the development of Murdoch University included the first units in science, technology and society, and also energy studies. These are still major strengths of the curriculum at Murdoch University. As an undergraduate student in those days, I had personal experience of Keith's innovative approaches to teaching and an enduring memory of his unfailing encouragement of students. He sat in the front row during my very first tutorial presentation, absolutely beaming encouragement at me, while behind him, my less supportive mates were going and pointing to the clock. In his short years at Murdoch, before his untimely death in October 1981, Keith inspired many academic colleagues to share his vision and many undergraduate and graduate students to carry that vision into their professional careers. He also left a significant legacy of scientific writings, one example of which is the collection brought together by one of his graduate students, Ian Barnes, called Challenges for Einstein's Children. Following Keith's death, a group of his colleagues, led by Ian Barnes, established a memorial trust and sought donations from his colleagues and friends to initiate the Keith Roby Memorial Lecture in Keith's honour. This lecture has brought some powerful thinkers to Murdoch University and helped to inspire us to continue our efforts in the areas of social justice and sustainability. It is through the generous support of donors that the lecture series continues to be a successful annual event. I would like to thank those of you who have previously donated to the Keith Roby Memorial Lecture. Without the generous support of our donors, we would not have been able to attract world-class, thought-provoking and innovative speakers to address the most pressing and complex issues of our time. All of this in memory of Dr. Keith Roby. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. I think it's wonderful that we still have people who knew and benefited directly from Keith's teachings. I have, even though I never met him. I'd like to now invite Professor Chris Warren, Professor in Wildlife and Conservation Medicine, to formally introduce tonight's speaker and get everything really underway.
Thank you, Catherine. On behalf of the Keith Roby Memorial Lecture Committee, I'm delighted to welcome this year's distinguished visitor, Professor Peter Newman, to Murdoch University. Professor Peter Newman, a Fulbright scholar and internationally renowned environmental scientist, author and activist, has dedicated his life's work to making our cities more sustainable and reducing car dependency. Over his 50-year career, Professor Newman has written 23 books and more than 400 papers on sustainable cities and has worked to deliver his ideas in all levels of government. As Director of the Sustainability Policy Unit in the West Australian Government Department of Premier and Cabinet in 2001 to 2003, he was responsible for developing and drafting the state sustainability strategy, a pioneering instrument in the sustainable development of our state. Professor Newman was instrumental in establishing early sustainability research programs at Murdoch University through his role as inaugural director of the Institute for Sustainability and Technology Policy, ISTP. Currently, he is Professor of Sustainability at Curtin University. He has been awarded an Order of Australia for his contributions to urban design and sustainable transport, and in 2018 to 2019, he was the WA Scientist of the Year. Please welcome Professor Peter Newman to the stage as he presents A Life in Sustainability.
Well, what a privilege for me to be here. It's a very healing thing to come back to my first real home in the world of academia. I was here on October the 15th, 50 years ago, for the first meeting of the School of Environmental and Life Sciences. And it was amazing yesterday to walk around this campus again and feel that excitement of those days. It was also a great privilege to have been a friend of Keith Roby's in those days as we helped to establish our new university. What a privilege. Let me see how I do this there. Let me also acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people. I like to do this by showing where we sit in history in terms of the massive change that we're going through, being this one here, where we're rapidly leaving the safe operating space of the 1 degree. That's essentially been the history in which we have created cities and agriculture. Before that, Noongar people knew how to survive over 60,000 years. But the last 10,000 years we've made cities and agriculture, and we're rapidly leaving the space at which that operated best. So it's a challenge. The summary of what I want to say is in 3 parts. And it starts in the origins of environmental protection, which we were part of in that stage of discovering environmental legislation and how to assess projects, and we needed to minimise their impact. The second stage moved through the 90s when sustainability was discovered as the word to guide things, and it was to minimise environmental, social and environmental impact and integrate it into all policy. And then the third phase that we're entering now, which is about improving environment, community and economy together. And the byline of that is net zero by 2050 with the SDGs. And now you can all go home, but I do need to explain that and to explain it in terms of the values that have driven these changes and how they came as much as anything in our life through the Murdoch ethos. My journey can reflect some of that. And I knew about Walter Murdoch because I was a local. When I came here, I was about the only foundation lecturer who hadn't come from another part of the world. Somehow or other, a local got a job. And Walter Murdoch was part of my family's history. And I grew up reading and knowing a lot about him. So the early days at Murdoch, then with Keith Roby and others, were creating this ethos, and it really did build on Murdoch's ideas. and how they now work and are working out in the sustainability journey will be what I try to do. So my journey to start with. I was born in August 1945, just after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs were dropped. Just imagine my mother giving birth at that time, saying, what the heck have I brought a child into here? But you never heard about that, because it was a time, an easier time when you look back. And we left Perth, where I was born and grew up, in a little place called Upwey in the Dandenongs outside Melbourne. It was a beautiful place, and you can see there the 5 kids. Now, they're nearly all here tonight, which is pretty amazing, and my sister's flown over from Melbourne for it, and Mark and Deb are here, Barb's down south. But that family was so critical to my really believing in myself and having a strength to do the kind of things that I've jumped into in all my life. So it builds on something from those days. We moved to Hobart in '59 when my dad got the job of the headmaster of Hutchins School, which I then went to, which was pretty strange, but I certainly did enjoy my time at that school and the exploring places like Cradle Mountain and playing a lot of sport. The books that I was given to read at that time included books like Lucid Intervals, which I brought with me tonight. It's a book with a lot of really beautiful, expressive concepts that were published in the West Australian and other newspapers across Australia. And he says this in one chapter on fear. The fear we have to conquer if we are to seek wisdom. He was in fact a West Australian UWA professor, so he would say that, is the fear of change. This is what we have to conquer, and that has been a very strong part of the Murdoch ethos. And this reading of the past, he said in his chapter on My Creed, I say, gives an ethic, a star to steer by every action which furthers the unfolding of the soul of man is a right action. Now, that's a very spiritual kind of understanding, and he was reflecting on this after going to St Paul's in London and hearing a sermon. And he said, then I can see that this looks like a sermon. Try to forgive me. He was always trying to apologise for any pomposity, and I would have to seek that forgiveness tonight as well. So we moved back to Perth in 1964, and I began a journey of chemistry and then to environmental science. And that was a journey I reflect on now. I think it started in 1970 with the first Earth Day. I went along to that and I thought, gee whiz, there's a lot of problems out there that I hadn't heard much about in my education there, but it sounded interesting. And really it said, what kind of future do we have? And what was it going to do with me? And not long after that, we went on a bus trip which took us through the snowy mountains, and the bus behind us crashed. And at that time, we went down and into Sydney and watched Monday Conference. And the first we heard about this bus going over the cliff was directly after watching Ehrlich talk about the future in an incredibly exciting way. A scientist talking about the values of survival and what we had to do was extraordinary and very meaningful for me to think, well, we could have gone over the cliff like that did, but we didn't. So the ecology prophet became something that I really wanted to know more about, and I eventually went to work with him. But first of all, we went to Delft and studied environmental science. Now, that was the only place in the world you could then do environmental science. And it was a wonderful experience and certainly helped me get this job, because I think I was the only applicant who had a qualification in the area. But it was also discovering European cities and seeing what a wonderful thing it was that they just didn't need cars. That really struck me. And then we went to Stanford, in San Francisco, working with Ehrlich on ecology. It was an amazing experience. But the first oil crisis happened. And all of a sudden, having cars and car dependence in a city was a real big issue. So the place fell apart. And we were studying that and working on what it meant. And most people couldn't tell me what was different about San Francisco compared to Delft, where we had lived. And so I thought, we've really got to study that. And it was the start of that journey for me. But there was a conundrum behind all this. Ehrlich was very strong that we were going to get into a collapse stage, the collapse of civilization. He said it's near certainty at that time, within decades. Well, he's still saying it, and he's still probably right, but the problem was that he said we shouldn't have children, and that was very hard to accept. We were young, we were facing a future, and I couldn't work out this conundrum between hope and despair. So how do we get hope? Well, first of all, I got a job, which was terrific, and we hitchhiked across America after that experience with Ehrlich, and I got a telegram in Chicago saying, "You have been appointed a lecturer at Murdoch University with a wonderful salary of $9,481. And that seemed pretty good at the time. And we came back to Perth and started this journey. So yesterday, 50 years ago, I first saw this beautiful veranda that is still there and still a big part of curtains of Murdoch's. Sorry about that. It'll probably happen again. I'm not getting old. The beautiful place that it is now, this was surrounded by sand, I'd have to say, at that time, but the beauty of it was the people. Now, I don't know if Brian Hill's here tonight, but he was a major influence on me, and a very spiritual man who really helped in those early days as the Professor of Education. And Horst is bound to be here. You here, Horst? He's hiding. He wrote amazing books, but he never took a picture. That's the best picture I could get of Horst, hiding on his boat. But he was a really influential person in those days. And Phil is here, I know. And Phil was then a young lecturer in the physics side of things, but he immediately took up with Keith and I on the energy and life systems, the environmental side of things, and he's continued to do that, and he's a major part of our culture here. And of course, Keith Roby, who really was an extraordinary part of those days, because he seemed to know everything. He just was, he was at least 2 years older than me, but he just had experiences that were so important. He had come from Yale, where he had studied chemistry and theology, and that was really interesting for me. So I saw this on the website. Sustainability has been part of Murdoch ethos since our inception. In 1974, we delivered Australia's first environmental science degree. That's what the Vice-Chancellor said tonight. It's wonderful to hear, because we didn't get that kind of publicity at the time. We were always second, third behind the vet school and other parts, but we were really pioneering this area. we were establishing a new profession. And the EPA was established during that period, and Des O'Connor was really a big part of that, and I got on it as well later, and John Bailey did, and a number of people here I see have been involved in that whole process ever since. But beneath it all, we were always seeking hope and practical solutions. That conundrum was always very present with me. What are we doing that is creating hope? And we were very much committed to that approach. I started the Introduction to Environmental Science unit in 1975, and some of the people here who did that, and it was based on George Seddon's book, which is a very hopeful book. Beautiful science, but directed towards change that can help make a better city in all kinds of ways. Beautiful stuff. And that really was a great textbook to start with. Now we took that and applied it to the Coburn wetlands here. And Trevor, Martin Bowman, Nick Dunlop, people who were part of that first experience. There were 7 students did this work, and we came up with the Coburn Wetland Study, which set up the Belio Regional Park, which is very important, and Phil was basically involved in all of that management there. But Des was an extraordinary part of this. He drove so many of these innovations. He set out the 5 areas: climate, waste and recycling, ecology, mapping, which is now GIS, and global and local policy, which is the area I mostly was involved in. Now that's Tom Lyons, a really good mate. We lost him a few years ago. And Peter Bridgewater, who was at the ecology, but Tom was appointed in 1974-5 to work on climate, way before others really saw that that was going to become a really big issue. The other part of those early days was the Environmental Technology Centre, and Gun Ho came in 1976, I think, and helped to establish that, and that lasted for a very long period. It's a beautiful place with a lot of innovation in it. It wasn't as spectacular as this. I mean, this is really something, isn't it? But it did a lot of innovations, very small-scale innovations, in the construction of it, the materials, the energy, the water, the waste, the gardening, and people were there from the permaculture area, like Josh Byrne. Also the Solar Energy Research Institute, and Stephen and Wal are here from that tonight. They started up to work on solar energy and to show what could be done, and we were part of all that. So the other part was that Des really wanted, and because he loved to fly, he loved to go to these areas around the state, and he said, we've got to get out and do things that help Indigenous communities that are just starting, because many of them were coming in from areas where they'd been banished from and rediscovering how to live in the areas that were their country. But they needed housing, and they needed all the conveniences of water and waste and so on. So these were done through the little institute that we set up there. And the first green shoots that were there, that were pictures provided by Josh. We also had a bit of a global reach out to Indonesia, because Gun was from there and he established links into Murdoch University, and Surup Tono's here tonight from there, and he did his PhD with us. And that whole process of working in those areas was all set in place, and we found that there was a lot that we could learn about together in those places. The big thing was the PhDs, the environmental science staff, the families. We were very close, and people like Ernesto Soroli, Mike Moritz, terrific PhDs who really helped us enjoy that whole experience of being at Murdoch. But Keith was the genuine, gentle, spiritual leader of sustainability in those early days. He was the guy who actually helped us find our word for what we were doing. But Trevor and Sean were two of his students, and Trevor just happens to be the brother-in-law, but not being too family-oriented here, but he came in that first year, and it was really important for me to be able to have someone I could talk to about what sort of things they thought about when I was giving my lectures, and he was very positive most of the time. Sean Foley was one of the hippies from Fremantle who we managed to get into the university and who thrived here, and Keith was the supervisor of a number of his research projects, and Sean became a real Asian expert with PhD from ANU and lots of other work that continues. But Keith, it's interesting to see his background. The phrase he used all the time was just, participatory and sustainable society, JPSS. And there were various people who could say that a lot quicker than others. JPSS was the way we ended up saying it. But Keith came from the World Council of Churches conference in Boston in 1975, where that was declared to be the agenda for the future. And Christine Ledger's Roby Lecture is all about that. It was a very exciting lecture that she gave, giving that background. So he was applying those ideas, and he set up the Energy and Life Systems. It was an extraordinary trunk course. He set up the Science, Technology and Society. He was always showing how we needed to get beyond the science and engineering into the values and social change that was necessary. So he called that community science, and in many ways was way ahead of his time on that, because what we're discovering today is that the technologies which are now working work best at that community scale, and I'll come to that. But he was also a real hope merchant. It was terrific to have him around. And he struggled with this word, PWR. PWR was the first name we had, Population World Resources, for this degree, which was not quite environmental science, and it wasn't quite economics and history and philosophy, but all of those were combined. What do we call it? We called it Population World Resources. And it lasted for a while before we said, oh, we've got to try something else. People don't really know what that means, so we called it Population Resources and Technology. That lasted 6 years. Then we moved to social ecology. We thought, maybe it's that. That didn't work, only 3 years. And then Brundtland came out. We were very slow learners, where we already had the name from Keith. Sustainable Society was part of his rubric, and sustainable development now, and what's remained ever since. And I think that's a fantastic term that's still very important. So the evolution of sustainability then, I think it starts with this idea that eco-anxiety is not enough. We should not be just making people feel bad. We need to address hope, which is based on change that means something, preferably from the community. And so I started these sort of things and wrote this book with Simon Neville and Louise Duxbury, Case Studies in Environmental Hope. And we found stories right across the state that we could tell and show in this book. And it was extraordinary to see how much was happening at that point. But also the family became more and more important. We didn't take Paul Ehrlich's advice. 3 kids and now lots of grandchildren. Sam's just arrived, walked in the door tonight, came down from Derby just for this. No, he's going to play in a rock band on the weekend. And it was extraordinary to have the opportunity to create a future with kids who needed to be part of that future. And I think that's an experience that everybody who's had that will say it's a gift, it's a privilege, and one that we treasure. The other thing that I treasure is the little church down there at Beaconsfield, St Paul's, that we've been going to for 50 years, and the people there who are very committed, many of them come tonight, but very committed to these ideas of sustainability and the spiritual aspect of it. That's Christabel Chamaret there, and others who are here. And the ideas that we came up with through that period, like Richard Raw's thinking, the established and dominant culture does not have authentic promises. It's got to be authentic. And Joanna Macy's active hope. It's something that Patsy Hallen here ran with in all of her work in ecofeminism and eco-philosophy that brought people into the actual environment and got them to understand it and love it and learn from it. So what I think comes through in this, and Jared Diamond wrote a book about it, How Societies Choose to Fail or Survive, that hope is a choice. It's not a good feeling rather than a bad feeling. It's a choice, and you have to make it, and that is how you change the world. Now, I'm reading Juice at the moment. It's hard going. Look, he might be right. This is the future. This is one of the things that might happen if we don't make the right choices in 100 years' time, living underground and struggling like it's like The Road and other books have been. But I really like also Hannah Ritchie, who did a PhD at Edinburgh in environmental science and ended up clinically depressed. And she said, I can't take all of this negativity. It cannot be as bad as that. So she's got this institute now that is so important and provides a lot of information. How we can be the first generation to build a sustainable planet. And it's a very positive contribution she's constantly making. But I learnt about it from the bottom-up processes that I got drawn into. Firstly, in local politics. This is me with Christie on my back, riding illegally to pick up votes. And I was elected to the local council in 1976. And that was our dream home, which we worked on for the next 50 years. And the city of Fremantle has been a very important part of my life in trialling the Hope agenda, and regenerating that and being part of that has been a privilege as well. And when the state government wanted to put a freeway through the middle of that, it was certainly pretty easy to get some opposition to that. But this one was a lot harder. When the train got closed down in 1979, I was still a councillor, and I said, we've got to stop this. And the mayor said to me, oh, you'll never win that. But we got Murdoch students and staff and family together and formed the Friends of the Railways. That's Rick Grounds there. He was doing his honours in environmental history. He became a major part of this project to save the railway. This is the last train to Freo in 1983. We won it, and the train was brought back, and we've been building ever since with 7 new rail lines. But what it did for me was create a career as a transport planner and academic, because not only did we document that and talk about it, but we started collecting data on why some cities had better rail systems and what it did for their city in terms of fuel. And all of that. And Jeff Kenworthy was really critical to that. He was a PhD student here at Murdoch, came in, I think, the second year. And these books, this trilogy of books, have become kind of classic works in urban planning and transport, because they really did find a way to get some hope into this rather hopeless story of car dependence. The middle one there was launched in the White House in 1999. So that did really launch me and gave us the ability to help provide information to the government, which often was carried through into the politics of change. We also did work with Jan Gell. We brought him to Australia to help talk about walkable cities, and we wrote up his life story, as well as doing projects with Murdoch students in the city centres. The trackless trams issue is now the one that we're running with, and it's been a struggle like all of them, but I think it's a very hopeful story because it's the next generation of trams. It's got batteries on the roof, you don't need the overheads. It's got sensors rather than needing to follow steel tracks, so it's very cheap, but it has the qualities of a tram. Let me show you what it's like. This is the first time I rode it, and that child, if he was on a bus, he'd be being grabbed by his parents because it's always bucking and moving around, and that's doing 70 kilometres an hour down a main road. So it's not just transport, though, it is about the cities making them more sustainable and walkable. So we brought one of those machines last year to the city of Stirling and had this symposium. People came from all over the world to show why this was the next technology. But the more important one was that one that was mentioned before about working with premiers and producing this sustainability strategy, because it was a real Murdoch exercise. I went in there to help Jeff Gallop because he was in my cricket team at Murdoch, and he said to me, look, we've committed, you just got elected, and he said, we've got to produce a sustainability strategy. You're a professor of sustainability, aren't you? You should know. I said, yeah, I know what's going on there. I hadn't a clue, of course, what to make a state sustainability strategy. How would you do it? There was no manual on that. And we started out on that, and I was given one staff member to cover 42 areas of government. So I got Murdoch students, undergraduates, postgraduates, PhD students, staff, anyone who could help. About 50 of them came, they got registered in the Premier's office, they were able to get all security clearances, and they started writing using the internet, which I didn't really know how to do at that point, but it was extraordinary how they could come up with the best practice around the world and find out what policies worked and what didn't at this stage in national exercises. But this was applied to a state, and we had to try and see what worked. And we put them all on the Premier's website. So just imagine you're handing in your assignment for doing some unit at Murdoch, and it's on the Premier's website already. You'd have to get a high distinction on that. And it was very enjoyable because there was extraordinary insights that were provided, and we were able to produce this as a result. And the whole idea of increasing this area of overlap that was integrating and making the future, that markets, communities and governments have different roles to play, and that we were playing jazz. This was the World Business Council on Sustainable Development's idea, that jazz, which is about partnerships and synergies and flexibility. There is no manual. You just got to make it up as you're going, but you've got a rough idea and you all can contribute. It's a very creative exercise. That's what was happening with us. And it was so exciting. So the ISTP was really born with that kind of experience. These are some of the staff. I don't think I've got Ian Barnes or John Phillimore there, but Michael Booth, Patsy Hallen, Laura Stocker, Steve Kinane, that's me, isn't it? Yeah. Alan Johnson, who's still a hero here, Brad Pettit, who became one, and Jeff Kenworthy and Dora Marinova. We had some amazing times together, wanting to make a difference, misfits making a difference. And Roger Seven wrote a nice little book about that. The other thing that was important for me was to get the chance to take these ideas and trial them out in other universities. I got asked to run a unit at the University of Pennsylvania. I did that through the 90s, again in Charlottesville in the 2010s, and the University of Colorado in Boulder. And at each opportunity, I wrote books about it, and at the National University of Singapore and the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts in Copenhagen. Incredible experiences to be able to take that experience from Perth and take it to other parts of the world and find that it worked and would be an inspiration to students. But the really big thing for me in the last 15 years has been IPCC and being able to work with people in groups like that. That's the group that wrote the chapter on transformation of our cities and in the global warming of 1.5 C. And that group, it's really interesting to see who they are. But this guy here is an American. And during that week when that picture was taken, Trump pulled out of the IPCC and said he's not going to follow up on the Paris Agreement. So what did he do? He got organised and called up all his friends and networks, and within 6 months he had 60% of the American economy who signed up to say, we are still in. Amazing, hopeful approach to that very depressing thing that happened then. But that's the way in which the world is created into this transition we're going through. And the other person is Bill Hare, great export from Murdoch. He runs climate analytics. He's got 250 staff who are in Potsdam, centred there, but they've got offices all around the world, and he lives most of the time in White Gum Valley and runs it from here. But he was in the early days, 1976 I think he started, and he did environmental science and physics, did his honours with Phil, and he's now an adjunct professor here. But the work that he does, he's a major advisor directly to the UN Secretary General, and the work that he does is extraordinary and very creative, and you should be very proud that Murdoch produced this gem. We, as in Josh Byrne and I, went to COP27 in Egypt. Talk about an experience of 60,000 of our closest friends in climate just having fun together. Very different to the early days of what we were trying to work on. Keith would have been delighted to be there. And we were asked to be part of the global stocktake. I just wanted to show you this picture of Josh Byrne on his knees, helping to scribe the statements made by the Saudi Arabians about why we had to use more gas. But we did have some good ideas and presented them, and again they were found to be very useful. This is the really good news though. This was part of the 2022 mitigation report, which took us 5 years to produce, so it's pretty out of date, but by then it was already showing these dramatic changes that these solar energy costs were coming down very quickly, and batteries and electric vehicles following very quickly as well. So the yellow lines, the brown line is the uptake, the adoption. Again, exponential growth is happening to help with this change. And apart from that, it's not just being driven by governments. It is being driven by the finance world. $88 trillion only available to projects that are net zero. So we're up to the future. We're really on the edge of that now. And we've been calling it regenerative development because it is different. It's not just minimising. We can't afford to minimise our emissions to the atmosphere. It's got to be completely removed and then increase the uptake of the carbon into the ecosystem. So we've got to have climate positive, it's got to be people positive, and it's got to be nature positive at the same time, and that's how net zero is defined. And you've got these 17 Sustainable Development Goals that we're meant to be drawing together along with the net zero agenda. And this is how we get rid of the fossil fuels, and the green parts are how we take CO2 out of the atmosphere. And we start getting global cooling from the moment we reach net zero, and that could be as soon as 2030 if we really got our act together. Not 2030, 2050 or 2040 even, but 2030 is a bit too close. But the idea of getting more CO2 taken on land activities and other technologies. This is a quick story. I wrote this paper because of what I've learned in the sustainability strategy, and now learning this is wholly new. Nobody knows how we're going to solve that net zero with the SDGs. That's really hard stuff. So I used this short story written by Edgar Allan Poe in 1840. It's about a sailing ship getting caught in a whirlpool, and it can see the rocks down the bottom. It's going to crash, and one of the sailors on the side of the boat says there's a barrel that's come out of the ship, and it's gone flicked itself out of the whirlpool. If we get hold of the barrels, we'll be able to survive. And he goes to the captain of the boat, who's at the helm, and he says, no, this is what we have to do. This is what I'm trained to do. This is the only solution. And of course, he grabs hold of a barrel, jumps out and survives, and the rest of the ship goes down. And the message from Edgar Allan Poe in the 1840s, which was a very difficult period of depression, that you can come out, but you have to grab hold of these barrels, the barrels of hope. And they're new, and we have to be able to change. We do need to embrace, in professional practice, all of these new changes. So where? Well, in rural and regional areas, of course, and I would say that eventually we'll get to using hydrogen, but not yet. It's not ready. We've got much better things we can get on with now, and it's a phase 2 technology. And there's a lot going on in our rural and regional areas. Regenerative farming. This is if you go to Orange Tractor in Mount Barker, it's got beautiful wine, but they're making it net zero purely because they are adding carbon to the soil all the time. It's building up, building up. And we went last week to Walleen. You've got to go and see this place. It is extraordinary what they're doing. It's been on 4 times on Australian Story. And they are regenerating a pastoral station. They destocked and then they're rebuilding now because they've been able to show how dingoes take out the goats, cats, foxes, and help build up the carbon in the plants because they're managing the herbivores. And they are therefore getting better biodiversity, and the cattle are better fed, and you can have a balanced and regenerated cattle station. That woman in the middle is doing a PhD at Sydney University on the dingoes in Walleen Station and how that works. It's a superb place to visit, really is. But we've also got other great stories in saving our forests. The first place that actually set aside old growth forest, saving carbon. Lots of work in the bush with oil mallee and Simon Dawkins' work there, and the Gondwana Links project, which was on in the Ongerup story that Back Roads was just a few weeks ago. That whole area on the south coast being joined up with biodiversity and carbon offset plantings that are working really well and helping to create a model for how you can regenerate a whole regional area. That's now being adopted in Africa, on the southern parts of the Sahara, that model. So finally, the transition in our cities, going from exploitive cities to sustainable cities to regenerative cities. And these are amazing graphs. This is where we're at in our time in history. Super exponential growth in wind generation, solar generation, EVs and batteries. Way beyond anything we predicted in the IPCC reports just a few years ago. It's really taking off. And this is my elder sister. I had to put this in because she came over. She runs a group called, or has set it up, called Lighter Footprints in the eastern suburbs in Melbourne. And she recently ran this exercise called Electrify Boroondara, which attracted 1,000 people to work out how to get off gas in their kitchens and water heating and heating and cooling. And it works. It's the kind of thing we're doing at the church in Fremantle, and we've just recently got an electric vehicle recharger. And all of the major parties were there to see this. So eventually people are learning about this, and the Teals in particular have picked up on this bottom-up process, this community science that's working. And what Josh and I are doing at Curtin is this project called Pathways to Net Zero Precincts. It is about how we can get that scale, community science at a scale that works at community level. This is the building we work in, which is the Curtin Exchange Precinct, which is a net zero building with all kinds of technology in it, but it's also beautifully designed with the landscape. And essentially the urban design fits in with the certification, fits in with the grid integration and the governance. And we've got PhDs working on all of these projects with lots of case studies. And the Net Zero Precinct is meant to demonstrate how the city can change into this approach. And recently we've been given a grant through Hawaiian, Dusan's here from Hawaiian, the way in which to model this. This is the real science, being able to show not only how you do it, but how you can do scenarios from that and show other people how it can be done. And that process is we're working on with Peter Calthorpe and a whole series of people from California. So it's a real global project, and one we're very proud of, and why I keep working. And the fundamental ideas, I've written books about it, but it's essentially the smart system integration that makes the solar and batteries and electric vehicles fit together and work in different parts of the cities in different ways. This is a real community science approach and is one that I think will help considerably in this transition. We've got lots of good case studies before. Josh's house is a real global success story. And this one's a good Murdoch story because Gemma Green did commerce at Murdoch. And then she went to London, ended up working with JP Morgan and told by her mother to come home and find a husband and bring up grandchildren. And so she came and did all of that, but she also did a PhD on WGV, that White Gum Valley project, which has been a very good story of how you share solar. And she set up a business called Power Ledger. It's now got 85 staff and works in 25 countries around the world. She's moved to Switzerland and they've got a project in Uttar Pradesh with 250 million people taking up the kind of things that Wal and Steve first talked about here in the Solar Energy Research Institute many years ago. So the democratisation of power for a sustainable future is the basis of Power Ledger. So we've exported a multinational corporation to help the rest of the world come to terms with this. And Witchcliffe Eco Village, if you really want to see the future, go and see this down in Witchcliffe near Margaret River. Yesterday was this statement made that we have 75% now coming in at times to our grid from renewables across Australia. And this is a world first. So purely phenomenal, says AEMO. The world is watching as rooftop PV leads the surge to 100% renewables. We've been doing this now in Perth and Adelaide in particular in extraordinary ways, and it's really taking off. So Giles, who came from Western Australia, I don't know where he went to university, but he's a really, Giles Parkinson. There is reason to be really positive about where we're going, and I think it's really exciting to see where we're placed in the international context. There is a lot more that needs to be done, but he's helping to show that. So the final thoughts, this is where we've been, exploitative development, impact all the time, turning it over with environmental science and sustainable development, now regenerative development. And this is the era that we're now creating. This is the future. And he foresaw it all. So this is our time in history to continue to show the hope in sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Professor Peter Newman. What a treat. A special honour for me, also sharing my 50th anniversary. So much of the uni, which is pretty cool, but to be standing up here with one of my heroes, along with many of you being my heroes. I'd like to ask Martin to come forwards now. You've got this special time to plug Peter for questions, things he didn't fill you in on, anything that you'd like to know more about. We've got microphones, so pop your hands up. Martin's going to facilitate the quick Q&A time, and I'll just help by pointing out which hands are poked in the air.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Peter. My name's Martin Ander, everyone, from Environmental Engineering here at Murdoch, and it was actually Peter, thank you, Peter, in 1988 that introduced me to Murdoch University, and Peter actually got me started on a journey working for 15 years with Aboriginal communities all over Australia. Peter established a group here called Remote Area Developments Group, and it was a great honour to start my journey here at Murdoch with Peter and spending all those wonderful years working. Still here now in the Environmental Engineering Department, so thank you, Peter.
Mate. You did good.
Thank you. So, now with that we've got time for 2 or 3 questions. So please, who would like to start? Yes, right in the middle there. Can we have the microphone there, please?
Hello.
He's got a speech. Sorry.
It may be a bit off topic, but you're talking so much about Murdoch University, and the context of my question is the government review of WA's public universities, which set up the conversation of uni mergers. As the weakest of the four public unis, a merger of Murdoch, say with UWA, will present a takeover. I'm asking for a response on the idea for Murdoch, with the support of the WA government, takes over Notre Dame University in Fremantle to secure its long-term future.
Good luck. Look, I've lived through 3 or 4 times that Murdoch was going to disappear and become part of another university. It never happened, and it's never going to, and I don't think anyone is really interested in it. I've got to tell you that the merger that's happened in South Australia is essentially to keep Adelaide University having the kind of numbers that enable them to be part of the Group 8, because Curtin was about to become far better at it than them. And so you can't have that happen. So they're the sort of stupid things that get used to cause these interactions to occur. But they've each got their role to play, and they should continue to do that.
Mine's a fairly simple question, and it is on topic. In all of your slides that you talked about tonight, you talked about net zero, not near zero. Can you explain to me why you use that? Because that kind of leads to carbon sequestering, which is not really a technology that works yet. What do you mean by net zero?
Yeah, well, net zero was part of the Paris Agreement. That was the term that they created there and was agreed to by 197 nations. So I'm not making it up and using it. It's used in that process because they recognise that it isn't just about getting zero emissions, it's also about bringing it down after we get to net zero emissions, after we get to zero fossil fuels. We've still got to keep drawing down. We've got to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Otherwise, we will continue to have climate change. And that process needs to begin now, and has been. And there are issues to do with sequestering carbon, but there's a lot of very good projects as well that are able to show that they are putting carbon into materials like your beautiful building that is going to be there for 100 years sequestering carbon. It's got it in the body of the building, and that is part of what you need to do, as well as putting it into soil and putting it into the roots and the growth of trees, and we need to save trees and grow more trees everywhere as part of this transition. But we also need the technology of dragging it out of the atmosphere, and there are people working on that in Switzerland and Sweden and so on that eventually will come good, but that's not working yet. And so we can't depend on that. We've got to get on with the things that do work and are commercial now. Solar, batteries, electric vehicles, and all kinds of ways of fitting that together. 80% of what we need to do is right there with them.
Okay. Peter, you've been involved in the big fight about reopening the Fremantle railway line. We've also seen the struggle around the Row 8. And now you've shown us a beautiful picture of a trackless tram. I've just got my question is, okay, you've been involved in some political fights or political discussions or political lobbying, whatever. What have been the biggest problems, political problems that you've faced in advancing sustainability, and what advice would you give us to win?
Well, I do think the fear of change prevents most change from happening. There is a fear that we'd be going too quickly if we brought in trackless trams into Perth. And that's driven by the bus industry as much as anyone who don't particularly like this change, but they could benefit greatly by running those ones as well. It is a change, and our role in civil society, and universities need to grab this all the time, and the media do, and not be bought or captured by big businesses. And that change is really put on the agenda by civil society, because we're talking about, we can see the next 2 generations. Civil society has that deeper ethical responsibility. And so we don't fear change, we fear it unless we change. And our children and grandchildren will suffer unless we do that. So that's why we keep going and keep pushing the hope with all kinds of opportunities that are there. But I don't think it's easy. I don't think it'll ever be easy. And there is always these structural things that get in the way. But underneath it all is that ethical issue of the fear of change.
Peter, I hate to ask a depressing question, but it follows on from what you've just said. What do you feel about the weakening state, or the weakened state of our Environmental Protection Authority, about the overwhelming power of the fossil fuel industry in WA, and that awful attack that was on Tanya Plibersik's nature positive laws when she came to WA?
Yeah, look, I've worked a lot with state governments, Labor governments, and I really respect what they do, but they're all part of the political system, and they all want to get re-elected, and you do not want the opposition elected, and therefore they make compromises. But I would have to say that the state and the federal government are compromising too quickly on these issues. There is an enormous growing momentum in the community, and the younger you are, the more you see that these people are just not getting it. They need to change, and the changes that we're pushing are not going to destroy the economy. They're going to make it. We're going to be a better economy if we do that, and we're going to have a better community. But the powers of the fossil fuel industry to change that agenda and to make it one of not moving too quickly, very, very strong. But my brother who's here, he was part of the process of stopping tobacco. That was thought to be so powerful. How could you ever stop people smoking? Well, we got down to 5% or something. It's going back up again with the rejuvenated campaigns they put in under the surface of suggesting that vaping was better. But that whole process, it's very hard. You had doctors out there at night painting over the top of advertising and winning, because they brought around the public on it. Now that's the kind of process that Carolyn's part of in Burundara, that whole process of change. And you see it here. They electrify the valley, and that's now spreading. There's about 10 other local government areas adopting the electrify agenda, which is to get rid of gas from your own home and work out how to do that and how to then extend that into the broader community. That movement is very strong. When you go to meetings and there are 1,000 people come in the town hall we had with Saul Griffith. Those are growing, and I think that Labor parties in every state will lose a lot of seats unless they get onto the agenda that environment matters, sustainability matters, and net zero matters most of all.
Thank you, Peter. I think we have time for one more question if there's one more going. Up here, yes.
Thank you very much for a fantastic presentation, Peter. I'm curious, how important do you think is it for the success to get towards net zero, for us as individuals to change our patterns of consumption, our behaviour and of our use of resources? Thank you.
Yeah, look, clearly lifestyles matter, but it's very, very hard to change when it's all structured into how we live and work and move. And all of that needs to be changes in technology as well as the design of the cities, as well as our behaviour patterns. And that's the kind of thing we study, and I remain hopeful that it's going to happen a lot quicker and it will all begin to fall into place very quickly. There are people you can follow who show these numbers. That super exponential growth is way beyond our mind to be able to understand how quickly it happens. Remember the mobile phone? I mean, we just before you knew it, everybody had a mobile phone. Every Maasai herdsman had one, as well as wealthy people. It just took over, and nobody was eventually saying, well, you know, we can't have mobile phones because the whole landline system is critical to, you know, how we live. It just took off. That's the kind of thing that's happening with solar, batteries and electric vehicles, and it could dramatically sweep away all of these companies and all of these governments that don't see this. It's happening, and it's there's a guy called Tony Seba you can read. He's partly at Stanford, but he mostly is out talking about these things, and you can see him on all kinds of television. Lots of I'm trying to think of the word, but where you present all the time. TED Talks. He's done brilliant TED Talks. Thank you. He says that he believes there will be 80% of world's power by 2030 will be renewable, based on the trends that are happening. That's almost beyond belief. Well, it is. And the same things he said by 2035, 100% of the market for new cars will be electric and will just dominate so much. Well, you can see these trends are changing. They can be stopped and we could get in the way of it, but it is possible to believe that in the 2030s we could get a substantial way along to what we're trying to achieve. It won't need to wait to 2050. We can go almost there. That's what some people are saying. I would love to think it, and I'm kind of choosing to talk about it as much as I can, but I'm also very aware that there are places that are trying very hard to stop it, and the American election is a big factor in this one.
Thank you for that question. I've got one more sneaky question because I put my hand up and I didn't get a microphone.
Oh.
I just wanted to say, you've mentioned a couple of times the recurring theme about hope being active, you know, hope the action of a walking man, all of those sorts of things. But you can tell from the questions that there are a lot of people in the room who are working really hard. And some days, as I know you've experienced, it's just really hard. What do you do on those days when you feel like punching a nose or a tree or a wall to keep hold of that hopefulness? Because there's so much out there.
You switch off when it's too much, and I go and watch the doctors, and then I get even more depressed. Yeah, look, you have to choose all the time to hope, and that is often the time when you most don't feel like it, and then that means you just shape your life in a way that is going to help with that. Now, that's one of the things I do every Sunday morning at church, is basically to reset that kind of agenda, and that is an important step forward. But you've really got to do it every day, and that whole process is something that I think we need to teach people how to do as much as anything. But I am a built-in hope merchant, I'm afraid, and you just have to blame my parents for that.
Well, you taught me, so good job. All right. You're allowed to sit down. Okay, now that Peter finally gets to have a well-earned sit down, I'm going to invite our wonderful esteemed Professor Trina Burgess, who is the Executive Director of the Harry Butler Institute, to the stage to deliver our vote of thanks. Thanks, Trina.
Thanks, Catherine. The Harry Butler Institute is a sustainability institute, but I think we're going to have to start having a few conversations about the regenerative approaches and start thinking steps further about what we're doing in the research that we do. And it's not just good enough to keep things as they are, we've got to try to make things much, much better. Anyway, so on behalf of Murdoch University, I would like to thank Professor Peter Newman for taking the time to reflect on his extraordinary life in sustainability. It was a fitting tribute to Keith Roby, and whose memory we hold this lecture. Professor Newman took us on a personal journey that weaved through place and time as he explored his role in the evolution of sustainability in Western Australia and globally, and for those that influenced him along the way, including Keith Roby and Des O'Connor and the university's namesake, Sir Walter Murdoch, and many more. And you pointed some of them out, many of whom are in the audience tonight, and all these people that you've worked with, and it's really amazing, and the things that they've gone on to do with your influence. Being part of Murdoch University's origins, he was able to share a unique perspective. And I mean, I have to say personally, over the last couple of days, just meeting people that were here at the beginning makes me wish that I was here at the beginning, because it must have been so exciting. It's through visionaries such as Peter Newman, Keith Roby and Sir Walter Murdoch that our university and its academics have gone on to be a leading influence in the sustainability theory and practice. It's through our research, which continues today in places like the Harry Butler Institute and various schools, probably every school across the university. It's very much embedded in the ethos of Murdoch. And the minds that have been taught here at Murdoch, which have carried that knowledge to corners of the globe, and some of which have also returned for this lecture today. It's said that you can't know where you're going until you know where you've been, and your presentation has provided clarity on our past, coupled with your insightful messages for the future. We thank you, Professor Newman, not only for the wisdom you have shared with us today, but for your continued dedication to the memory of Keith Roby. So everybody, please join me in giving Peter Newman a final round of applause. And so there's just one last formality for the evening. which is to have Josh is here as one of the co-chairs of MUENSA, which is the Murdoch University Environmental Sciences Association, and we'd just like him to present Professor Newman with a certificate.
Thanks, Trina. Thanks, Josh. The Student Association is the lifeblood of our amazing environmental science program here. It keeps all the academics like us going as well, because they keep us honest. I'd like to just thank you again, Peter, for your absolutely amazing, powerful message of hope for our audience. We all need to remember that whenever we're going forward. I'd also especially like to thank Kathy, Mark and Karina for coming along all this way to be here tonight. It's always special to have a piece of Keith in the room with us. And of course, all of the other wonderful guests who've travelled far and wide to come here this evening.